There's a kind of a group of scholars who are looking at the great Indian masters and, for example, discovering Nagarjuna and realizing that many of the great questions that Western philosophy takes great pride in and asking have already been actually asked. So there's a kind of a sense of discovery, but also a sense of shock and a confusion. What do you do with it? How do you handle this thing, you know?
Thupten Jinpa is a renowned scholar, translator, and Buddhist practitioner, widely recognized for his expertise in both Buddhist philosophy and Western academia. He's worked as a principal English translator for His Holiness the Dalai Lama since 1985. He himself trained as a monk in a monastery in Hunsur and Mundgood in Karnataka. After completing his doctorate from Cambridge University, he's taught Buddhist psychology, epistemology, metaphysics, and what is loosely translated as the middle way philosophy. He's the board chair of the Mind and Life Institute, a scholar at the Stanford Institute for Neuroinnovation and Translational Neurosciences, and on the executive committee of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at the School of Medicine at Stanford University. He's a founder and president of the Compassion Institute, which aims to cultivate compassion through secular and evidence-based programs. And he's authored several of his own books, a favorite being A Fearless Heart, How the Courage to be Compassionate Can Transform Our Lives. I'm thrilled to have him here today. Hi, I cannot hear you. I think you do.
I just unmuted myself. Good evening. Yeah.
Thank you for your acceptance to participate today.
No. I mean, it's a good idea. Yeah.
I first want to start by confessing to my own biases. I've always been fascinated with Tibetan Buddhism, and I learned a little about it while studying at the Kasturba Medical College in Manipal, which is about, I think, 250 kilometers or 155 miles from Hunsur, where you studied. While working there, I met several monks who had escaped Tibet in the 1960s. And I had extensive conversations with a few of them. These conversations led me to seeing a lot of similarities between the Western evidence-based models that I was being taught at medical college at the time and what I understood as Eastern philosophy. So, for instance, I learned from these monks a little bit about Nagarjuna's dialectical methods, and it brought to mind at that time, with my limited understanding, similarities with, say, this is just as an example, Freudian psychoanalysis. So, for instance, Sigmund Freud wrote about the conscious and unconscious mind a century ago, but Nagarjuna deconstructed these ideas of reality over 2000 years ago. Both were analysts, both used extensive dialogue as a means of inquiry. Both acknowledged the role of dukkha or suffering or neurosis in human life. Freud is just one example, but then I went on to read about Carl Jung, Fitzgerald, Erich Fromm, Abraham Maslow, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I mean, the list goes on, and we jokingly kind of refer to this as import-export psychotherapy. Sure. So my question to you is, I mean, do you see any similarities either in history or in the present day between Buddhist philosophies and some Western psychologies? And if so, how do you feel about that? And in your opinion, has there been any acknowledgement of this connection, or have you seen more of an appropriation of ideas where a lot is lost in translation?
One of the interesting things about our contemporary time, we're living in a global culture and global context. So there is, for the first time, there's a kind of a free market type attitude towards knowledge. So because many of these texts of the great Indian masters as well as the Tibetans are now translated into English, language is no longer a barrier to have access to them. People from the West, thinkers and scholars, engage with, say, text from great Indian thinker like Nagarjuna or Dharmakirti or Vasubandhu. I don't think we can lump everyone in one group. There are different perspectives or approaches. there's a group of thinkers, scholars who are very interested in the philosophical side. The philosophy is more about asking the deep question, looking at the fundamental nature of reality and what it means to be a human being. So those are big questions which are really universal to all philosophical tradition. So there's a kind of a group of scholars who are looking at the great Indian masters and for example discovering Nagarjuna and realizing that many of the great questions that Western philosophy takes great pride in asking have already been actually asked. So there's a kind of a sense of discovery, but also a sense of shock, and a confusion. What do you do with it? How do you handle this thing? But there's also some people, many actually, looking at Buddhist sources and other Indian traditions, primarily from the perspective of insights into human psychology. So that's a little different. They are not looking for answering deeper questions of reality or human existence and why we're here kind of thing. But they're looking for how do we understand the human condition? What motivates human beings? What is the underlying, drives? In contemporary psychology, Darwinian evolution theory is very influential. That's the overarching ideology, if you can say, pursuit of self-interest, survival of the fittest, and all of these drives, the kind of explanatory principle of understanding human behavior. But in Indian tradition, and particularly in Buddhist tradition, you have a completely different story, but they're also a rich psychology. And one of the things that really distinguish Buddhist psychology or Indian psychology versus the contemporary modern psychology is that in the South Asian or Indian and Tibetan tradition, the psychology is not really for the sake of understanding descriptive knowledge. The underlying motivation is moral and soteriological. The seeking moksha, seeking liberation, seeking freedom is the underlying motive. And then looking at human psychology of what comes in the way, like obstacles, what hinders us, what promotes it, what amplifies it, what are the conditions. So the psychology has a deeper objective. And this is one of the reasons why, for example, among clinical scientists now and neuroscientists, there is a lot of interest in exploring masters like, Vasubandhu and Asanga, particularly, understanding their psychology. And one of the beautiful things about Buddhist tradition is that because there is no concept of God, then the moksha and liberation has to be explained in a humanistic way, as a process of self-discovery and enlightenment. And large part of that also involves understanding the technology, if you want, with the meditation techniques, mind training techniques. So many of the current interests, for example, like from the movement of mindfulness research and clinical research, is in some sense kind of opportunistic. I mean, you can call it appropriation, but for me as an Asian and a Tibetan Buddhist, I see this actually as a good thing, because in the end, what is being brought out, admittedly out of its traditional context, is in the service of humanity, service of helping others, service of alleviating suffering. So I think for Buddhists generally, this shouldn't be a problem. I think from a history of ideas point of view, then there is a more complicated issue, because history of ideas at the moment is very Eurocentric. It's Western-centric. So, and generally history of ideas tend to be dominated by science. But if you include philosophy and psychology, we truly want to be inclusive. And then there needs to be a rethinking, re-envisioning of the history of ideas. Because history of ideas, a key part of that is the chronology. Who came up with this idea first? And at the moment, it is dominated by Western perspective. So those are kind of, more complicated issues. Yeah.
That's a different perspective. That's remarkable to know your point of view, and I'm grateful to you for sharing. So that brings me to another question that I had, that the first time that I remember being introduced to your work was after marrying Justin, my husband, who is American. And he took me to buy some books at a Snowline publications shop in Ithaca. And we stumbled upon, yes, I still have them, these 4 curious DVDs, which I still have. On these DVDs, there were discussions between scientists and Buddhist practitioners. Amongst them was you translating for His Holiness. And I was fascinated that there was a dialogue, any dialogue at all, between students and practitioners of science and scholars from theology or religious traditions. I mean, the keyword here is "and," because I'm used to seeing them pitted against each other, very Christopher Hitchens versus Tony Blair or Richard Dawkins versus John Lennox. So it was truly fascinating to see then and to continue to follow what the Mind and Life Institute dialogues at MIT has grown to become. And today, I think there is one other social media influencer. I think his name is Lex Friedman. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, a Russian-American computer scientist who is one of the few younger scientists that I've seen who embodies this philosophy of openness and curiosity above all else. So this interdisciplinary dialogue among various investigative traditions, among the neurosciences, psychology, philosophy, and the monastic traditions, you've been a part of these for over 3 decades. And so my question to you is, what impact have these very rich discussions had on you in your own practice and your own life?
Well, one of the remarkable things that His Holiness has been able to establish and promote, particularly through the auspices of Mind and Life, dialogues, is the kind of a creation of a new model of dialogue between science on the one side and spirituality and contemplative traditions on the other. Yeah. Because you're right, up until recently, it has more been that of a confrontation, kind of competing for domains and, sort of Stephen Jay Gould's idea of, magisterium, kind of, you recognize your boundaries and don't encroach and we let you live kind of thing. What His Holiness has done is through these dialogues, create a model of dialogue where there is a genuine respect for the different voices that are partners in a dialogue. And then there's also, on the part of everybody, humility is an important part of that quality that you bring. And also some kind of, understanding that your perspective, regardless of how sophisticated and rich that may be, cannot capture the totality of reality that you're examining. And that is, applies to Buddhism as well. So once you bring these kind of, perspectives that reflect humility and openness, then there is less tendency to feel that you need to reduce the other into your own framework. That's generally what happens when science gets into picture. Science has a very kind of dominant and chauvinistic kind of approach. It wants to turn everything else into objects of study, not a partner in an inquiry, but as an object of study, because they are the ones who have the real measures and tools and mathematics and everything else is a field of study that the science will bring to. So I think this is one of the reasons why it has really flourished, because both sides learn from each other. And in my own case, before I began translating for His Holiness, I had quite a naive attitude towards what science is. And this is probably shared by probably 99% of general public, that somehow we see science as having a privileged position, embodying knowledge, and science is kind of, gradually progressing, and eventually it will come up with a full description of reality. And there is a kind of a cumulative, kind of increase in the body of knowledge. Well, through these dialogues, I've begun to appreciate that actually, science is a bit more limited in its scope. And the limitation comes from both its strength and weakness. The strength is its amazing investigative approach, the tools, the kind of the measurements, the rigor and the replicability, falsifiability theory, and all of this method. In other words, the scientific method is its strength. But that very strength also imposes a limitation, because what you discover and what comes into your scope of inquiry is determined by the approach you bring. And given that science is a very unique approach to reality, is just simply no way that it can capture the entire reality within its domain. So that, I think, was an important discovery that I felt. And then also, for me, perhaps the more powerful impact has been a deeper appreciation of my own Indian and Tibetan Buddhist heritage. There's a Tibetan master who said that even though you may have eyes to look at others, to see yourself, you need a mirror, because you need a point of reference. It's only by engaging with intellectual traditions, knowledge traditions of other, like Western tradition, that you begin to see certain aspects of your own tradition with a spotlight. For me, even to this day, probably among all the books I read, probably 70-80% I read in my own language, Tibetan. And these are especially great Indian masters like Nagarjuna, Asanga. And when it comes to psychology, particularly the two brothers, Asanga and Vasubandhu, are really remarkable. They have written extensively. So many of the ideas that you see in contemporary psychology, for example, like people make great fuss about the discovery of, basic emotions versus higher order distinction. But this is there in Asanga and Vasubandhu long time ago. They call it slightly different. They call it substantially real and constructs based on those substantially real emotions. But in other words, the same thing, a more fundamental basic category of emotions, and then higher order constructs that are based upon those. That distinction is really there. And also, the kind of how many of the emotional reactions are contingent upon a certain self-view that when we acquire, and then how that sort of investment of self in the process brings a strong emotional reaction. All of these are there, in in the Buddhist. So for me, the more profound impact has been a deeper appreciation of the insights and the wisdom that are really there in the great Indian masters' writings.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Can I share a story with you, which someone had told me?
Sure.
There was, I don't know if you know, Mullah Nasruddin, who was a 13th century, what they call as a wise fool. And, he's 50 years old, and he's sitting at the crossroads of his village. And he's sitting and he sees these two roads diverging before him. The road on the left leads to the local mosque, and the one on the right leads to the local school where science is taught. And his friends find this strange. They say, "You're old. You've been going to the mosque for years, and you're the village fool. So what will you do in school?" And so they ask him, "You've never ever stepped into a school, and so why the dilemma?" He looks up and he says, "You see, I've noticed that those who walk the path of science often become so full of themselves that they're convinced they know everything, or they will eventually know it all. But then those who walk the path of religion, the pious ones," he says, "bless them, sometimes they become so lost in their faith that they forget to seek the truth." So his friends ask him, "So then what are you going to do now?" And he rises from his seat, he dusts off his robe, and he says, "I think I'll just take this third path that goes straight to my house, and invite those from both paths to come share a cup of tea with me." So what you said, it reminds me of that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story.
Yeah. So in a lot of my therapy, I use a lot of stories, and a lot of them come from Jataka tales. Actually, I love reading books and stories.
Yes.
So I have two more questions.
Sure.
The annual review of psychology, there was a paper on self-compassion. And over the years, but especially now, psychologists are discussing and studying compassion-based interventions. You are spoken about in our circles as very highly knowledgeable about these interventions. And I know that you have designed a course at Stanford called the Compassion Cultivation Training Program.
Yeah.
I also read that it includes a cognitive, I know this is very, Western, but cognitive, affective, intentional, and motivational component. So can you talk to me a little bit about what this program is, who is it for, and is it being used for clinical populations, or is it just under study and being researched and published at the moment?
Well, thank you for the question. Actually, what inspired me to develop the program is a long-held vision on the part of His Holiness that that compassion is a very natural human quality, and if we can help people learn techniques and skills to make it more conscious and make it more active, it will impact their life in a very profound way. So that's a really kind of his aspiration. And also, His Holiness often invokes the scientific appreciation of the social nature of human beings as the place to bring in appreciation of compassion. Because compassion is nothing but relational. And compassion is about human connection. And it also speaks powerfully to the natural human impulse to care for others and want to help. So it's basically the root of pro-social behavior. And this is the work that Adele Diamond has dedicated her life to, promoting. When you combine child developmental psychology and the new discoveries of the implications of human beings as social creatures, we begin to now have the space for deeper appreciation of the power and place of compassion. His Holiness has been advocating for many, many decades that the Darwinian picture of human nature is only one-sided. Yes, human beings are driven by pursuit of self-interest. That's an important underlying motivation. But human beings are also driven by seeking connection, seeking nurturing, and which manifest in the form of pro-social behavior, and on a broader level, the opposite of competition, which is cooperation. And His Holiness has argued that without embracing that part of human nature, we will never be able to have a full explanation of the evolution of cooperation. Of course, he's arguing from a more philosophical, Buddhist kind of based perspective, but now evolution science has moved on. They have finally come to accept that empathy, at least empathy, is a biologically inherited trait of human nature, and somehow a full picture of human nature must include the place for empathy. So there is a whole debate, which has a technical kind of debate, is about what they call inclusive fitness versus multi-layer selection. At the heart of this is, how do you understand the reality of altruistic behavior? So I think that's where all of this is kind of the larger background in which this new appreciation of compassion is emerging. There's a whole new science of compassion is emerging. So it was in that context, I thought the time has come to now develop an actual standardized program. And the aim is to really, through this process, and a large part of which is actually peer-to-peer self-learning. The instructor's role is to create the space. And the idea is to help people connect with their own natural compassion and become more aware of its place in everyday life, and then tap into that as a resource for conscious intention, so that their intention can shape their motivation, which then would manifest in behavior. That's a really kind of learning to be more intentional about one's compassion, kind of paying conscious attention to the place of compassion, and never forgetting the humanity of the other person that you're interacting with. So this is the common humanity idea. CCT itself is not designed for any particular constituency. It's really for quote unquote general public. It's a sort of a generic program. It has also been used for clinical purposes. For example, recent 2 papers in JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, the psychiatry section, published 2 papers based on a big study done in Denmark. Yeah, you have it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there are now clinical kind of, trials done. What we are doing now is to put this out there so that it would be evaluated, studied, and applied. And then we have now several hundred certified instructors who are delivering this to general public across the world now, especially after the pandemic. They also do it through online Zoom. But what we are now doing is to use CCT as a resource and then adapt it for specific sectors. For example, we have a big program on helping physicians deal with burnout called Caring from Inside Out. And it's a 6-week, 1-hour lunch break protocol because physicians don't have time, so we have to meet where they are. And then there is another program called Courageous Heart. It's for the law enforcement, designed for police officers, who are struggling with all sorts of issues of depression. And it's presented as a wellness, but it has a very strong compassion component, including emotional awareness and then bringing intention, looking at your intention in your interaction. So through Compassion Institute, what we are doing is to now look at key sectors and see, can we develop very specifically adapted compassion-based interventions. And these, are in early stages. We're also working in close collaboration with health scientists at University of California, San Diego. As a pilot test, we developed a small module on anatomy lab, bringing compassion lens to the way in which the trainees, the physicians will view the donor's body, what kind of attitude, because it turns out that one of the very stressful areas is in the anatomy lab. A lot of, medical trainees come out traumatized. So, and the initial findings have been quite remarkable. So, and our hope is that we will be able to bring something like this in the medical training itself, so that trainee physicians learn early enough some of these mind-based tools that help them deal with their own stresses, as well as never suppress their intention to serve, which is what that brings them to caring professions. And that's a big part of my work these days, actually helping this Compassion Institute, because I founded it and I'm responsible for raising the funds and just get it going.
It's interesting all that you say, because when I started off this was not a question I was going to ask you, but I just thought about it right now, that compassion fatigue is something that so many of my colleagues who started off wanting to help over the last 2 years have really burned out completely.
Yeah.
And post-COVID, I know 50% or more than that have just quit psychology completely. They said,
Yeah.
we will do anything, but we don't want to, we don't have it in us to help another soul because we need to help ourselves.
True.
So is that also something that you'll deal with in this program, where you seem to say that there's a lot of compassion fatigue also that you're dealing with in healthcare workers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is because we as humans, we're not designed to be able to be exposed to someone else's acute suffering on an ongoing basis. But the caring professions are the ones where they have chosen a profession that requires constant exposure to acute suffering. And there, unless you learn some techniques, skills to be able to sort of, when the time comes, switch off and kind of rejuvenate yourself. And without, and a lot of caregivers chose the route of suppression as a means of self-protection. But that also, in the long run, is not healthy. It turns out it's one of the 3 factors that causes burnout. So the emotional suppression, emotional exhaustion, which is when you're constantly exposed, and then a sense of powerlessness. You can't do anything. And this is a bit more complicated because sometimes that is tied to systems that is not very helpful.
No, I think I understand powerlessness the best, being here in India right now, because there's so many circumstances that make you feel that, I don't think I have much choice here. And then should I then give off myself and be in pain? Anyway,
Sure.
So yes, thank you for sharing that. That was very helpful. I have a last question. Very often I meet people who speak about mindfulness or mindfulness-based practices in a very grandiose way because of the manner in which it is being promoted or sensationalized in practice. And I read a few publications, and two of them were really good meta-analysis that seem to suggest that researchers and participants can be biased in favor of, or
True.
medical professionals can be over enthusiastic in prescriptions of such
Mm.
interventions, especially in India.
Sure.
And many doctors that I work with, they recommend mindfulness-based interventions or yoga, either as a quick fix or a magic pill to cure stress, or they think of it in a very simplistic linear fashion where they contend that if you practice continuously, like yama, niyama, pranayama, asana. So if you practice continuously, you should become more mindful, more aware, more controlled, more happy, and so more liberated from
Sure.
this illusion of self. And this feeling that mindfulness is all good and can do no harm. So, what are your thoughts about this, especially with its increasing popularity in serious clinical settings?
I think when we talk about mindfulness today, particularly in the secular kind of context, like clinical setting, I think we have to remember that we're actually talking about a very specific meaning of mindfulness. It's the contemporary definition of mindfulness. So it's not the same as the traditional one, which is sati in Pali and smriti in Sanskrit. So of course, it is based upon the Buddhist practice. It's derived from that, but it is a very modern version. And there, sometimes, particularly in the Indian context, because there is a rich narrative that is rooted in the tradition of progressions into the samadhis and various stages of mental kind of development, there's a conflation of what is actually offered, which is the modern version, and then what is promised, which is invoking the narrative in the texts and the tradition. And that I don't think is helpful because it just, it's apples and oranges. The modern mindfulness, which is being used in the clinical context, like especially, John Kabat-Zinn's one was developed specifically for dealing with chronic pain. It was for pain management. And now increasingly mindfulness is used for treatment of depression, and that makes perfect sense if you look at the modern mindfulness, because modern mindfulness, the active ingredient is the ability to apply your meta-awareness. Be present in the moment, not rush to judge, and then be almost like a detached observer to your own experience, and being with that experience, whether it is painful or joyful or neutral. And that requires a kind of a meta level awareness, through paying attention. And we can see why that is helpful to dealing with depression, because depression, even though initially the treatment probably requires medication because it's probably a function of imbalance in the brain chemicals, but for prevention of relapse, you can see logically why mindfulness practice would be helpful, because a large part of the thing that causes relapse is the rumination. You get fixated on a certain thought, and then you go through that, kind of rabbit hole in a spiral way, and you get lost, you get swept away by your own narrative. So through meta-awareness, you learn to catch yourself before you go through that, spinning rumination. And if you are able to handle your rumination, then you can see why it would be helpful from preventing you from relapse. Those are powerful techniques, beautiful techniques, but then the connection between that and the higher evolved spiritual states, it's not that obvious. So I think it's better particularly for physicians in the clinical context when they're prescribing mindfulness, not to overpromise, and be really aware of the cultural context in which clinical applications of mindfulness have arisen. clinical applications of mindfulness has not arisen because people are seeking moksha. If you're seeking moksha, then the traditional approach is way better because it has thousands of years of history behind it. So I think it's just mixing the two is what makes it very confusing.
Thank you for that. That was very useful. I thought of, last month I broke my finger and my hand and my foot, and I was climbing down
You fell down?
Yes, I go up and down the hill. And it's interesting, I was thinking about pain, and up there when I broke everything, I said, this is a great opportunity. And in that moment, of course, there was extreme pain. And the very next second, I said, I'm going to try to use some of the mindfulness techniques that I learned. And I tried that for exactly, I think, a half of a second. And then I told my husband, I think I'm just hungry. I need sugar. Give me some sugar. And then I said, I try to observe. I try to do everything. And all at the end of it, I just need sugar. So I came down and I had khajur. I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
And I came back, and much later, when my pain was subsided, I said to myself, it's very nice theoretically for me to feel like I want to use these techniques in that situation. But in this extreme pain, I just thought of coming down the hill.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, one of the tragic side of overpromising is that when things don't happen, you make the person feel guilty. Something's wrong with me. Why isn't this magic happening? That's not a good thing to.
Yes, and also one last thing is I'm enjoying your book, The Fearless Heart. What struck me the most is your dedication to your parents when you say that despite all their hardships as Tibetan refugees in India, they instilled in you the faith in basic goodness of humanity. I think that really stayed with me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Wonderful. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.